Hey, this is Zulem Urbina, and tune into the relay for the latest news in boxing all around the world. Thank you for supporting myself and other female boxers. We truly appreciate it.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to kick it off with the super bantamweight contest between Elise Scotney, unbeaten up-and-comer of Cotford, Elise Scotney, and Argentina's own former IBF champion Jorgelina Guanini, who gave Elise Scotney all she could handle. This was a fight that was determined by quality over quantity. Volume, punching, aggressiveness, and come-forwardness was...
That was Jorgelina's calling card in this fight.
And I told you guys ahead of this fight that in spite of Jorgelina Guanini coming right off a loss ahead of this fight, this should not be interpreted as a walk in the park for Elise Scotney, who ahead of this fight only had 3 professional bouts, 3 professional contests. It wasn't exactly a foregone conclusion that Ellie would win. At minimum,
I figured she'd have to work for it.
and that's what she did. Ellie Scotney, from where I'm sitting, won this fight on her feet, maintaining distance, maintaining space, attempting to, though Jorgelina Guanini made that quite difficult.
Crowding Elise Scotney.
Letting her hands go and looking to land big punches, big shots. When I say that this fight was won by way of quality over quantity, you know,
Listen.
at first glance it might seem like Jorgelina Guanini's having it her way. You had to pay attention to who's actually landing punches, who's actually getting off. Ellie Scotney's defensive prowess,
Moments where she was catching and shooting.
sticking and moving. She did struggle with Jorgelina Guanini. She did. This was a big step up in competition for Ellie. This was Ellie Scotney's first 10-rounder.
It was ballsy fighting somebody like this in only her 4th pro fight.
But the cleaner work was coming from Ellie Scotney throughout. That's the main thing for me. Jorgelina Guanini effectively crowded Ellie Scotney, forced her to use the ring, move around, try to maintain some distance, keep some space between her and Jorgelina. It's not that Jorgelina didn't make her work for it. It's that ultimately the effective aggression was coming from Ellie. The cleaner shots, the cleaner work.
Yeah, Jorgelina threw a lot of punches, but a lot of that got blocked.
Ellie Scotney didn't catch those shots on the arms and gloves. She dove into a clinch to effectively smother Jorgelina Guanini. I mean, what I see here is that Ellie Scotney had to go through the gears to secure the W in this fight, but that's what she did, and she showed the cleaner, more effective boxing. Those body shots late from Guanini, they seemed to have affected Ellie Scotney. I'd say that was in the 8th round.
Oh yeah, Guanini was definitely digging into her midsection.
She was really taking it to Ellie Scotney, but Ellie weathered the storm. She was able to endure. We saw good shots from the outside from Scotney, good shots mid-range to inside from Scotney as well, who's taking shape as a fighter, becoming more and more of a boxer puncher.
Yeah, that's the look of her.
Boxer who can fight going forwards, fight going backwards, fight going sideways. Boxer that's not afraid to assert herself mid-range to inside in the pocket. She doesn't have the look of a pure boxer, a stick and move outside jabber, and she's not just a come-forward pressure fighter, a volume puncher. There is more to Ellie Scotney's game. I have to say that under the tutelage of Shane McGuigan, this is a fighter whose base style is developing into that of a boxer puncher.
And it suits her. Ellie Scotney's got a lot of tools.
They wouldn't have put her in there with someone like Jorgelina Guanini in what was only her 4th pro fight if she didn't.
Ellie Scotney's got a lot of tools.
And another W to add to her professional record. In light of this performance, I think that the Scotney people, they need to take their foot off the gas a bit. It was ambitious, ballsy, them taking on someone like Jorgelina Guanini in only her 4th pro fight. But moving forwards, if she is to be ready for a title fight against Jorgelina Rivas,
There was a lesser version of a WBA title on the line in this fight.
a regional version of the title. It seems to me that the Scotney people are going the WBA route. And if they want to be ready for someone as experienced as Jorgelina Rivas, they've got to take their foot off the gas a bit. Maybe 1 or 2 more fights before she has that title fight with Jorgelina.
Because Ellie won, but it was a hard night's work. It wasn't easy.
They've got to pump those brakes. We then come to the main event of that same card, the super middleweight contest between the United States' own former IBF middleweight champion Daniel Jacobs and world title challenger at super middleweight John Ryder. I'm going to be completely honest, I don't agree with the judges' scorecards in this thing. I struggled to find more than 4 rounds to give John Ryder, being completely honest. I don't see how he could have won more than 4, maybe, just maybe 5. It seems to me that Daniel Jacobs swept most of the first half of this fight. John Ryder found his way into it in the second half, I'd say around rounds 7, 8, and 9. I gave those rounds to John.
And I don't know, maybe John picked up a round in the first half?
Maybe he did, and I must have missed it, because the first half seemed to me to have been swept by Daniel Jacobs, who was fighting out of the orthodox stance in most of the first half, if not all of it, having a lot of success landing the right hand.
Yeah, he landed a few right hands early.
Daniel Jacobs, for the most part, is an orthodox fighter. For the most part, he is. He does do a bit of switch hitting, though more often than not, he is fighting out of the orthodox stance, whereas John's a southpaw.
Danny started off this fight out of the orthodox stance.
And from where I was sitting, he was having a lot of success in doing so. He seemed sharp, very much alert, landing several right hands through the early goings of this fight.
Fighting on his feet.
Maintaining a bit of distance between himself and John and asserting himself when necessary. And when that didn't work, he'd dive into a clinch, smother John Ryder's work. It's for this reason that I'm not sure how the judges could have found more than 4 or 5 rounds to give to John Ryder. I mean, I'm not one of these guys that shakes his fists at the sky screaming robbery every other weekend. I don't throw that word around as often as some others, but I have to say that
This smells like home cooking.
maybe it's karma. Maybe it's karma rearing its ugly head at both of these boys, both of these guys. Karma coming back to bite Danny in the ass for the gift that he got over Gabriel Rosado, and karma coming back around for John Ryder, who, in the eyes of some, did enough to have beat Callum Smith, but he didn't get the nod then. He got it here, now, with Daniel Jacobs. Maybe that's what this was.
But Danny didn't look anywhere near as flustered as Callum Smith did with John.
He didn't. From where I'm sitting, Callum Smith was a lot more flustered against John Ryder than Danny Jacobs was. But Callum Smith was awarded the decision, and Danny Jacobs wasn't against that same John Ryder. You ask me, who struggled more with John, Danny or Callum? And I'd say Callum. Callum seemed a lot more flustered by the come-forward aggression of John Ryder.
But Callum got the decision and Danny didn't.
Comparatively, I think Daniel Jacobs struggled less with John Ryder than Callum Smith did. I think comparatively, Daniel Jacobs fought a better fight, a smarter fight than Callum did, because Callum Smith's best punches really are his straight punches when he can get full extension on that arm. Thus, a smaller fighter with a lower center of gravity, slipping and sliding and crowding him, is going to fluster him in a way that it doesn't fluster Daniel Jacobs. Daniel Jacobs is capable mid-range to inside. He's not limited to boxing from the outside, throwing straight punches. He's a capable mid-range to inside guy.
Mid-range to inside hooker.
Doesn't make any goddamn sense to me, if I'm being honest with you. I struggled to find 4 or 5 rounds. 4 or 5 rounds that I could have given to John Ryder, let alone 7 or 8.
I think Danny got robbed, I do.
I also happen to think that Daniel Jacobs didn't do himself any favors in the second half of this fight, switching from orthodox to southpaw. I think he showed the better work, the cleaner work, the more effective work, fighting out of the orthodox stance than the southpaw stance. I don't know what the rhyme and reason for the switching was. I don't.
In the heat of the exchange, John Ryder landed some hard shots.
That was around round 7, 8, 9, and Danny was fighting out of the southpaw stance in those rounds. It's not a coincidence. Danny is a more effective fighter as an orthodox fighter than he is a southpaw, because when he was fighting out of the southpaw stance, he was taking punishment, he was visibly hurt. It's a wonder he made it out of those rounds.
Well, I can hardly say that costed Danny the fight, because I don't think Danny lost the fight.
I'm telling you, I couldn't find more than 4 or 5 rounds. 5 the max, and that's being generous. Very generous. I couldn't find more than 4 or 5 rounds to give John Ryder.
Where does Danny Jacobs go from here?
It's hard to say. Daniel Jacobs is a guy who's made a lot of money throughout his career. The Golovkin fight, the Canelo Alvarez fight. I mean, he's accustomed to being paid a certain way. Here today at super middleweight, coming off this loss.
Does he keep fighting?
It's not like there aren't fights out there for him. There are. Billy Joe Saunders, a former middleweight champion like Daniel, is a former middleweight champion. Billy Joe Saunders being a 2-division champion. He's coming off a loss right now the same way Danny is, and he's on the rebound. The way that Danny is, the same way that Danny is. A fight between them makes some sense, though.
Is Danny motivated anymore?
He looked terrible in that Gabriel Rosado fight over a year ago. According to Daniel Jacobs himself, he was just going through the motions in that fight. In this fight, he looked more alive, looked more alert, looked more up for it, but he still lost.
Daniel Jacobs being more motivated was a factor ahead of this fight. You had to wonder.
Is he really up for it anymore? Because if he isn't, he could be in store for a very long night. What does the future hold for the rest of Daniel Jacobs' career? That's the question. For John Ryder, it's on to bigger and better things. Eddie Hearn has gone as far as throwing John's name in the hat for a potential Canelo Alvarez fight in the United Kingdom. And while I don't dismiss that possibility, it's a possibility. I mean, Canelo Alvarez did box Avni Yildirim, right?
Right.
Stranger things have happened, though ultimately, if you ask me, do I think Canelo Alvarez is going to box John Ryder next? The answer is no. I don't think that's what's next for Canelo.
I don't think that's what's next for John.
I think this is a career best win, quote-unquote win for John Ryder. It's the biggest win on his entire resume, though being honest, I'm just not sure that he earned it. I struggled to find 4 or 5 clear rounds that John Ryder won. One division upstairs in the light heavyweight division, Bob Arum has confirmed that a 3-belt unification between Artur Beterbiev and Joe Smith Jr. is done and will take place at the end of June at the Garden, Madison Square Garden, per an interview conducted by way of IFL TV. And we've been waiting for this. It's a breath of fresh air.
It
is what it is. That these are 2 less guys, 2 less champions that are sitting around, sitting on their hands, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting on the Canelo Alvarez sweepstakes, waiting for Canelo to pick one of them. It's a breath of fresh air is what it is. And make no mistake, this is a summer blockbuster of a fight. This won't be a fight of finesse. There won't be much fiddling, much fencing of the jabs.
Somebody's going to the hospital.
This is that kind of a fight.
It is.
I think that Artur Beterbiev will emerge the favorite. I think Artur Beterbiev will be the favorite with the bookies. I think most people are going to pick Artur to win this fight because Artur is more than just a heavy-handed puncher. There is a method to his madness. Though Joe, you can't count him out. While he might emerge the underdog in this fight, he seems to do his best work when he's the underdog, when he's being counted out. Lest we forget, Joe Smith Jr. has pulled 4, count them 4, upsets in his professional career. The upset against Bernard Hopkins, Andres Fanfara, more recently the upset win over Jesse Hart and later Alvarez.
Now, he was favored to beat Vlasov, but he didn't look good against Vlasov.
No, he didn't. Some would say that the judges gave him a little bit too much consideration in that fight. That fight was for the vacant WBO title that he is now in possession of.
The one he successfully defended in his last fight.
That's right. Joe Smith Jr. has at least one successful title defense as a champion under his belt. He's going straight into this unification match, and I think he goes into it as the underdog, though that's not unfamiliar territory for Joe. And I think with Artur Beterbiev, Joe stands his best chance letting his hands go and being who he is.
Don't take turns. Don't punch in sequence with this guy.
You punch with him because you stand a better chance of landing in doing so. That's how Callum Johnson knocked him down. Almost got him out. That's Joe's best bet in this fight, and it's not foolproof. It's not a guarantee that punching with Artur is going to get you the W, but you stand your best shot doing that than letting him tee off while you survive in a high guard.
They're both pressure fighters.
So there are subtle differences, small nuances between them. Joe's best punches are straight punches, whereas Artur does his best work mid-range to inside.
Artur Beterbiev's better in the pocket than Joe.
Shoots a shorter jab than Joe also, doubling, sometimes tripling up on that jab to catch up to and thereby close the gap on his opponent.
Artur doesn't require as much space to generate power.
Devastating power. Some guys, they need to get full extension on their arm to generate power, to add mustard to the hot dog, whereas Artur don't need all that room, all that real estate to generate devastating power. He can generate it mid-range to inside, deep in the pocket, off short hooks to the body, uppercuts to the head, where there's not even much room.
There's not much chance of Joe Smith Jr. turning into Pernell Whitaker for this fight.
Fighting a more defensive fight than what we're accustomed to seeing, looking to box and punch. No. Joe's best bet is to be who he's been. That's his best shot. It's not a guarantee.
He's got to punch with Artur. That's his best shot at landing.
Landing hard. Joe Smith Jr. is a few years younger than Artur Beterbiev. Artur, he's approaching 40.
That's something to consider.
Though in terms of technique and who the more methodical pressure fighter really is, because they're both pressure fighters, that has to go to Artur Beterbiev.
It's going to be a hell of a fight. Look for this in June.
And finally, Leo Santa Cruz said, Magsayo is a great opponent. He doesn't run. He comes to fight.
And that's what I told you they would do.
He was quoted as saying, I think fighting Magsayo would be good because, I have the Mexican spirit. Santa Cruz replied during a post-fight press conference last Saturday night, at the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino. I come to fight, to leave everything in the ring. We're going to go in the gym, we're going to train, get stronger, and I think, Magsayo is a great opponent. He comes forward, throws a lot of punches, he does doesn't run, he comes to fight, and Mexico and the Philippines is always a great fight, like Pacquiao-Marquez. So I think it's going to be that type of fight with Magsayo.
Leo Santa Cruz fought on the undercard of Thurman versus Barrios last weekend.
He won a unanimous decision against Keenan Carbajal, and currently he is expected to face the winner of Conlon versus Wood.
I don't think that's going to happen, though. I think he's going to unify with Mark Magsayo.
That's what I think. Leo Santa Cruz added, I think Magsayo is a great fighter. He's perfect, He has good technique, great punches, power, everything. I don't know if it was because Gary Russell's hand was injured or nothing, but he looked good. I don't know what the difference was going to be if Russell would have been 100%, but, I don't take nothing away from Magsayo. He's a great fighter, and I think a fight against him would be really big. Both would be toe-to-toe. I think it would be a great fight between a Mexican and a Filipino. And I think the PBC is going to be a lot more interested in making that unification match than they were when Gary had the green belt, when Gary had the title. I think they'd sooner feed Leo to Mark Magsayo.
They never made the Gary Russell fight.
They never wanted to. We know there were some quotes from Leo Santa Cruz stating that maybe the issue was that Gary wanted too much money for the fight because, according to Leo, he's always wanted the fight. For what it's worth,
Yeah, I don't believe Leo Santa Cruz has ever wanted that fight.
though he might be right. Maybe Gary Russell Jr. wanted a little bit too much money for that fight. We know he was offered $1 million to box Josh Warrington in a unification match on the Matchroom side of things, and Gary turned that offer down. So maybe there's something to what Leo Santa Cruz is saying. Maybe in the past, Gary wanted too much money for that fight, so much that
the PBC never bothered to make it.
ancient history now. Mark Magsayo versus Leo Santa Cruz is a more feasible fight, a more doable fight, if I do say so myself. And I do think the PBC is going to make it because I reiterate, as we speak,
There's orders.
Leo Santa Cruz is supposed to box the winner of Conlon versus Wood in defense of his WBA title. The winner of that fight will be his mandatory challenger. And we all know the only way around a mandatory is...
Petition for an exemption to the mandatory so you can unify.
That's what Yordenis Ugas did. He was supposed to fight his mandatory challenger, a Stanionis, but he bellyached long enough that the WBA gave him a pass, gave him the green light, so he could unify with Errol Spence Jr. Who's to say that Leo Santa Cruz won't be given that same consideration so that he can unify with Mark Magsayo? In a fight, I think Mark Magsayo can win.
Yeah, Leo Santa Cruz sucks.
Mark Magsayo's a bit limited, a bit predictable, but
Leo Santa Cruz sucks.
I just can't see Leo Santa Cruz being forced into a situation where he has to face the winner of Conlon versus Wood. I just don't see that fight materializing. I see the PBC moving to put Leo in that ring, that squared circle, with Mark Magsayo in the near future.
Of course, Conlon versus Wood is right around the corner.
That's going down next month, so the people at the PBC, they've got to work fast. They've got to work now.